The Norwegian Shipping and Trade Mission was established in London in April 1942, administered the Norwegian merchant fleet outside German-controlled areas. Nortraship operated some 1,000 vessels and was the largest shipping company in the world. It is credited for giving a major contribution to the Allied war effort. The British politician Philip Noel Baker, Baron Noel Baker, commented after the war that the first great defeat for Hitler was the Battle of Britain. It was a turning point in history. If we had not had the Norwegian fleet of tankers on our side, we should not have had the aviation spirit to put our Hawker Hurricanes and our Spitfires into the sky. Without the Norwegian merchant fleet, Britain and the Allies would have lost the war. However, it was also criticized by the British for being too much focused on profit, and not enough on the war effort. The Norwegian countercharge was that British commercial interests were disguised as wartime needs. Nortraship had its main offices in London and New York, and was active during World War II. Nortraship was vital to Norway and the Axel government as it lacked other means to support the Allied fight against the Axis powers. The organization handed the various vessels back to their owners when Norway was liberated in May 1945. Norwegian merchant fleet prior to World War II. In the years after World War I, the Norwegian merchant fleet recouped its losses and expanded into new sectors, primarily tankers but also dry cargo vessels. The 1930s, in particular, were a growth period, in contrast to the other major shipping nations. By the end of 1938, some 7% of world tonnage was Norwegian, and Norway was the fourth largest shipping nation, behind the United Kingdom, the USA and Japan. Moreover, the expansion was based on new building, thus lowering the median age of Norwegian vessels. Most of the new vessels were powered by diesel motors. They accounted for some 62% of the fleet, while Japan had some 27% and the UK 25%. Around 42% of the fleet was modern tankers, a total of 18% of the world tanker tonnage. Norwegian shipowners were innovative and willing to take risks in ordering new vessels during the Depression. The various services needed for operation of ships had also been expanded, the most important being the classification society Det Norske Veritas, but also shipbrokers, insurance companies and shipping banks. The government also played an important part in establishing and updating regulations, and in providing schools for engineers and navigators. The Forgotten War, the 3rd of September 1939 to 9 April 1940, when Norway was invaded by Germany on the 9th of April 1940, the merchant fleet had been at war for 7 months. Norway was neutral but lost 58 ships and around 400 sailors. During these months, much of the framework that Nortraship was to operate within was created. Most importantly, the Norwegian-British Tonnage Agreement, called the Scheme Agreement. This stated that a percentage of the Norwegian fleet, including 2/3 of the tanker tonnage, was to go on charter to Britain. In return, Norway would receive important commodities. This agreement alleviated the British problem of access to the Norwegian fleet, especially the tankers, which they regarded as of exceptional importance. 1. To protect Norwegian neutrality, the agreement was negotiated between the British government and the Norwegian Shipowners Association. These negotiations showed the dual nature of the Norwegian merchant fleet. It was a huge asset, but also vital to both the belligerent factions. It was necessary to tread carefully in order to safeguard Norwegian neutrality but at the same time maintain the close commercial relationship with Britain. Norway's policy during World War I had been labelled that of the silent ally, and the Norwegian government wanted to continue along the same lines in World War II. The reasons for Norway being so important for the Allies were the relative decline of the British merchant fleet, overly optimistic pre-war tonnage planning, and the U.S. Neutrality Act, which effectively forbade U.S. vessels to enter the war zone. The only other nation with a comparable merchant fleet was the Netherlands, but they strongly rejected any tonnage agreement, in fear of German reprisals. The Norwegian government also established contingency plans for alerting vessels in case of war, in order to reduce the risk of being torpedoed. Most Norwegian vessels followed British convoys. The added safety was not without problems, as Norway as a neutral country thus was close to siding with one of the belligerents. The convoying regime reflected Norway's dependence on Britain, as had been the case during World War I. Norway invaded and Nortraship established. With the German invasion of Norway, the question of control of the Norwegian merchant fleet became critical, and the Norwegian government, the British government and the Germans were the main contenders. Around 15% of the total fleet was within the German-controlled area and was lost to the Allies. The battle would be for the remaining 85% sailing worldwide. The British contemplated confiscating the Norwegian merchant fleet as they did with the Danish fleet, but decided against it because the Norwegians continued to fight and because of intervention by the Norwegian ambassador in London. The Germans and the Norwegian collaborator Vidkun Quisling radioed to Norwegian vessels to sail for German-controlled waters, but the Norwegian masters ignored the orders. To counter German pressure, on the 12th of April the British Ministry of Shipping negotiated an agreement with the Norwegians that temporarily settled insurance problems for the Norwegian fleet, contingent on vessels sailing for Allied harbours, and this was radioed by the British Admiralty to all Norwegian merchant vessels. The next question was how the fleet was to be administered. The Norwegian ambassador was hard-pressed on this issue by both Britain and Norwegian ship owners in London. The British government wanted to take control of the Norwegian vessels, while Norwegian shipping professionals in London favoured an independent Norwegian organisation. The issue had to be decided by the Norwegian government. It was, however, difficult to communicate with it as the government was fleeing the advancing German forces. On the 16th of April, a meeting of Norwegian shipping professionals was held in the Norwegian Chamber of Commerce in London, where a detailed plan for an organisation for the merchant fleet was presented. The Norwegian ambassador, Erik Kolben, and ship owner in Gulf Heising Olsen were presented the plan but were however leaning towards a joint solution with the British Ministry of Shipping. The shipping professionals argued that the more independent organisation would be in a better position to safeguard Norwegian interests and the revenue from the fleet. As Kolben and Heising Olsen accepted this view, Nortraship was already set up on the 19th of April with the renting of offices at 144 Leadenhall Street in the city, and the following day, the 20th of April, the first shipping experts moved in. The Norwegian government now came forward with a cable that stated that the merchant fleet was to be administered jointly from London and New York. This was a surprise for the Norwegian ambassador in London, and the British government was not in favour. British pressure resulted in the Norwegian government in a meeting on the 22nd of April at Stuggarflaten in Romsdal adopting a decree that would requisition the Norwegian merchant fleet for the Norwegian government. The administration should be in London and be led by Øyvind Lorentzen, Norwegian Minister of Shipping. By this act, the largest shipping company in the world was created, with more than 1,000 vessels and around 30,000 seamen. London. The early days. The main challenges for the new organization were to take control of the around 1,000 vessels and to establish policies for working with Britain and the still neutral USA. There was a severe lack of qualified personnel, and those available were often vocal, determined and used to working independently. That several of the Nortraship staff had their own shipping interests to take care of further added to the problems of managing the organization. The top management was almost exclusively Norwegian, while the lower ranks were dependent on British and US personnel. An exception was the accounts department. A major British accounting firm staffed it. In October 1940, Nortraship had 230 employees in London. By October 1941, this was increased to 350, one-third Norwegians. At the same time, Nortraship New York had over 200 personnel, more than half of them Norwegians. There were also legal problems to be solved, most crucially, whether Nortraship could have at its disposal vessels owned by ship owners still in occupied Norway. This could be solved by the Norwegian government appointing a curator to act on behalf of the Norwegian owners. If this was not done, Nortraship vessels could be impounded in neutral harbors, for example in the US. After some discussion, the Norwegian government declared by law on the 18th of May 1940 that Øyvind Lorentzen was to act as curator. The insurance problems remained to be solved, as the initial British offer was provisional. The vessels needed several categories of insurance, and they were cut off from the insurance provided by insurance companies in occupied Norway, as was the case for the main office of the Classification Society, the DNV. On the 28th of May 1940, Øyvind Lorentzen signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the British Ministry of Shipping that solved the insurance issue for a period of 3 months. This MOU was to be the foundation for insurance agreements for the rest of the war. The classification problem was solved by Nortraship taking over the DNV branch offices around the world, coordinated from the DNV office in Newcastle upon Tyne. The fighting in France evolved disastrously. The British pushed for more tonnage and to harmonize wages. Norwegian seamen were paid significantly more than British. For political reasons, Nortraship received preferential treatment with an agreement signed on the 20th of June 1940.3 reducing the Norwegian seamen's wages solved the problem of unequal wages. The surplus was to be placed in a fund to be paid out after the war. New York. Internal fighting. After the initial organization of Nortraship was clear, the business perspective came into focus. Nortraship was the exiled Norwegian government's main source of income and, while contributing to the war effort, had to be managed for the highest possible profit. The vessels that were ceded to the British were fixed and had subsidized rates. The remainder were primarily sailing for the US at market rates. When Norway was invaded, German consuls boarded Norwegian vessels in several US harbors, attempting to have them sail for Norway. The Norwegian consulate did its best to counter this, and in deliberation with Norway's ambassador in London, the Norwegian Shipping Committee in New York was established. Among the challenges was the crew problem. Due to the agreement with the British, wages had been reduced from the 5th of June 1940, while crews on the free ships enjoyed an increase. Nazis and communists tried to demoralize the crews, and serious desertion problems were encountered, resulting in ships lying idle for months. Meanwhile, in London the British were hard-pressed with France on the verge of defeat. Within Nortraship, the view was gaining ground that it was inexcusable not to have an adequate office in New York. In spite of resistance from the Norwegian ambassador, it was decided on the 21st of May 1940 to send a Nortraship delegation to New York, for the reasons being both security in case of a German invasion, and commercial. Many Nortraship vessels called at U.S. ports. The British Foreign Minister, Lord Halifax, was informed of the decision on the 24th of May 1940. The Foreign Ministry were reluctant but had to accept it. The delegation arrived in New York on the 11th of June 1940 and started working with the already established committee, the main issues being organization and the freight earnings from the free ships. Until then they had been kept by the shipowners. This resulted in a revolt by the Norwegian shipping professionals in New York. They basically demanded the status quo. As the situation became critical, Øyvind Lorentzen decided to travel to New York to sort it out. He arrived on the 5th of July 1940 and after a meeting with the interim committee it was dissolved on the 15th of July 1940, thus paving the way for the establishment of Nortraship's New York office, which was located at 80 Broad Street, Manhattan. Øyvind Lorentzen had only planned for a brief visit in New York, and in his absence engulfed Ising Olsen, Norwegian representative in Britain for the Norwegian Shipowners Association, was acting head in London. Thus new friction was created, as the leaders of the two main Nortraship officers did not cooperate well. It was so severe that the Minister of Supply and Shipping, Trygve, had to forward it to the government for a formal resolution. On the 25th of October the Norwegian government stated that the two officers were parallel enterprises, each working independently with its ships. This also resulted in a tally of ships. On the 21st of November 1940 London administered 570 ships while New York had 282. Nortraship had a large fleet, and the expenses were considerable. A currency strategy was therefore necessary. It was formulated by Arnt Sund on the 1st of August 1940 and stated that expenses should be paid with sterling currencies, and use of US dollars was to be avoided. The reason for this was both the current currency situation and the anticipated situation after the war. In the autumn of 1940 Nortraship New York still had problems with free ships, most urgently those owned by Fred Olsen and Amp Co. The shipowner Thomas Olsen, residing in New York, insisted on managing them and argued that as the owner he was in the best position to do so. He was cautioned by Øyvind Lorentzen, to no avail, and after Olsen wrote a letter to the government, Trygve commented that Olsen's behavior was the kind that bordered on high treason. 5. Olsen was not alone in his skepticism regarding Nortraship, and on the 18th of February 1941 the Norwegian Shipowners Conference in America was established to secure Norwegian shipowners' interests outside Norway. Part of the skepticism was founded on the Norwegian government being Labour and thus possibly contemplating nationalization of the shipping companies after the war. The Prime Minister rejected this suggestion, and in a cable in March 1941 he promised that all ships would be handed back to their owners as soon as possible when the war was over. The internal quarrels were still not settled, partly due to Øyvind Lorentzen also having ships managed contrary to Nortraship policy, in the Noble Line led by his son Per Lorentzen. This was partly corrected after pressure from the London office in August 1940, but it damaged Lorentzen's position as head of Nortraship and was a recurring theme for his critics. One of the sternest opponents of Lorentzen was Hilmar Rexon, a maverick shipowner who had himself been in the spotlight for bending the Nortraship rules. More crewing problems. During the summer and autumn of 1940 ship losses catapulted. For the 9th of April to the 30th of December 1940, Nortraship lost 96 vessels and hundreds of seamen, almost all in the North Atlantic trade. This resulted in an increasing number of Norwegian seamen taking land-based work in the U.S. or changing to other countries' ships running in less dangerous areas. This created a shortage of seamen, which was a huge challenge for Nortraship and the Norwegian exile government. The seamen's organizations argued that the only effective remedy would be higher wages. This resulted in wage negotiations started in London in June 1941, which were concluded with a new and significantly higher wages agreement effective the 1st of September 1941. The British government was highly critical, but Nortraship and the Norwegian government's view was that it was impossible to withstand the seamen's demand. A second round of negotiations were concluded in an agreement effective the 1st of December 1942. With yet higher wages, this one was to last for the rest of the war. The need for strict discipline in wartime created other problems that were not easily solved. Even though the Norwegian government in exile decreed as early as the 12th of July 1940 that all Norwegian citizens above age of 18 had to register and take assigned work. This legislation was difficult to enforce as the government had no jurisdiction in the UK and no courts. This was facilitated by law by the British government of the 22nd of May 1941, the Allied Powers Act 1941, which gave Allied governments the power to establish their own courts on British soil where all but the most severe cases could be tried. Seamen and vessel safety. The biggest threat to the vessels was the Axis submarines, although mines, surface raiders and bombing from aircraft were also much feared. The main countermeasure was convoying large groups of merchant vessels, from 20 to 100, protected by naval ships. In 1940 the Norwegian vessels were unarmed, but slowly defensive measures like guns against surface submarines and low-flying aircraft were added. By the spring of 1945, around 1,700 men were registered as gunners on Norwegian vessels, and in addition there were some 900 British gunners. The vessels also received degaussing against magnetic mines, and seamen were issued watertight survival suits if the ship had to be abandoned. An important part of security was strict secrecy regarding routes and destinations, as made famous in the slogan, "Loose lips sinks ships." Despite these and other measures, losses were high. Of a total of about 30,000 Norwegian seamen, 3,670 lost their lives as a result of the war at sea, together with 977 foreign crewmen. 706 ships were lost to enemy action. British pressure for more tonnage. Even though most of the Norwegian ships were sailing for the Allies, the British in April 1941 wanted more. This was a delicate dilemma for Norway and Nortraship. On the one hand, Norway was allied with and dependent on Britain. On the other, the free ships that were sailing from the neutral US generated hard US dollars, much needed for reconstruction of Norway after the war. Moreover, voyages to the British Isles were the most dangerous, and Nortraship argued that the modern Norwegian tankers would be better utilized in other trades. A more hidden agenda was the Norwegian fear that the British and the USA would use the war to secure an unfair competitive post-war position. An initial mutual understanding was reached in a meeting in the British Ministry of Shipping on the 19th of March 1941. Nortraship was to transfer 500,000 tons of its free ships Even though the agreement was not officially signed until October, the work of tonnage transfer started. Nortraship London under Hising-Olsen tended to favour the British, while Nortraship New York under Lawrenson had a more business-like stance. As Allied losses increased dramatically, the British on the 29th of April 1941 demanded all Norwegian ships. This was a total surprise for the Norwegians. After hard negotiations with both the British and US shipping administrations, a new tonnage agreement was signed on the 10th of October 1941, effectively letting Britain charter 3/4 of all Norwegian vessels. In the negotiations, Nortraship tried to secure the US dollar freight income, to obtain a more equal footing with the British in governing the Allied merchant fleet, and to receive assurances regarding Norwegian shipping rights after the war. In the currency issue, Nortraship's stance seems to have prevailed. While in governing the Allied merchant fleet, an Anglo-Norwegian shipping committee was established that, despite scores of meetings, only superficially handled the issue. Finally, the British only gave vague promises as to the post-war shipping policies. In the two-year period from the 9th of April 1940 to the 9th of April 1942, a total of 157 Norwegian tankers made 615 voyages and delivered 6.9 million tons of oil, supplying some one-third of the total requirements of the British Isles. Tankers with clean, dirty oil and spare decks. Before the age of specialized supertankers, the vessels could take clean oil, dirty, or change between them. The clean oil would be refined as gasoline, while dirty was unrefined crude oil of heavy oil. A vessel only carrying clean oil would deteriorate faster, and so it was an ongoing fight from both Nortraship officers to get as many dirty cargoes as possible. Nortraship had a tough adversary in the British Ministry of War Transport, as they produced statistics showing that British vessels were carrying more clean cargoes than the Norwegian. The US Warshipping Administration were more accommodating in this issue and let several Norwegian vessels change to dirty cargoes. In peacetime, it is very rare, if it happens at all, that a tanker takes deck cargo. The war changed this, as there was a huge demand for transporting large pieces of war equipment from the US to Europe and other war theaters. It was quickly figured out that tankers had large uncluttered deck areas that could be used for volume cargoes, like airplanes and trucks. For this, the tankers had to be equipped with so-called spar decks, where the cargo could be secured. On the 1st of January 1944, a total of 58 Norwegian tankers were equipped to take deck cargo. The installation of the spar decks was paid for by the UK, and Nortraship did not ask any payment for deck cargo, as the charter for the oil cargo already covered the costs. The United States enters the war. Nortraship's situation as a shipping enterprise changed dramatically when the U.S. entered the war on the 7th of December 1941. When the U.S. was neutral, Nortraship could benefit from the lack of tonnage and increased rates. With the British Ministry of War Transport and the U.S. Warshipping Administration coordinating the policies in the Hogmanay Agreement, Nortraship and its chief negotiator, Erling Dekkernes, had a hard fight to protect Norwegian interests. Secret Fund. When Norway was dragged into the war, Norwegian sailors had significantly higher wages than other Allied sailors. The British government feared this could have a negative influence on the other Allied sailors and pressed for wage reduction. In the summer of 1940, an agreement was signed whereby the wage difference would be placed in a special fund, to be used for the Norwegian war sailors after the war. When the war ended, the fund was some 43 million Norwegian kroner. A vocal minority with Leif Vetlesen as its spokesman argued for the money to be paid directly to the sailors and not distributed as assistance to needy seamen and seamen's widows, as the government and the seamen's organizations proposed. It became a lengthy legal process that the government won in the Norwegian Supreme Court in February 1954. This created much bitterness, and the issue was not permanently solved until the Norwegian Parliament in 1972 decided to pay an ex gratia sum, a total of 155 million Norwegian kroner. With this, all seamen of the surviving relatives received 180 Norwegian kroner per month sale. Instrumental in solving this protracted case was Rear Admiral Thor Hov, himself a veteran from the war.